Hi, I'm Mari. I'm with the United States Study Center, and we're here for our wrap-up of the Republican National Convention 2020. I'm joined by CEO Professor Simon Jackman, Senior Advisor Jared Monshine, and non-resident fellow Kim Hoggard. So thanks for joining us today. Just like we did with the DNC last week, we're just going to go around quickly first and just hear from everyone, kind of like, what was your high, what was your low, looking back on the 4 days of the convention. Simon, I'll start with you.
I think the highlight in terms of spectacle was the event tonight in the United States from the South Lawn of the White House. That was remarkable in many respects. The place certainly looked good and an impressive fireworks show at the end, but it was, I think, if you're a Trump backer, that was a remarkably positive and an amazing event. If you're a Trump opponent, it was a remarkably depressing and sad event. So that was probably the highlight in terms of spectacle alone was the event tonight.
Yeah, and how about a low?
Oh, a low?
Yeah.
A low is probably the same thing. Seeing the White House, a public institution, with campaign placards or beamed onto the TV monitors at least. I've never seen that in my lifetime. I don't know if it's ever happened in American political history that the White House, it was one of the norms of American politics is a demarcation between governing and campaigning. And for staffers, there are very strict rules about the sorts of things you can do, campaign behavior you can undertake while on the property, while in the West Wing, in the White House complex. And typically, you've got to walk across the street and go somewhere else if you're conducting campaign business. Yeah. That seems to be out the window. And along with the use of the family as political accomplices and props or whatever. The whole event to me had it was quite distasteful in some regards. The White House as presidential palace almost that you would associate with countries that aren't democracies, frankly. And I couldn't. That sensation just kept filtering through my brain as I was watching, not so much the content of the speech, but the spectacle that Trump and his people created tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Kim, I'll throw to you. What was your high and your low?
I first would just say I agree with everything Simon said. The highlight, besides the fireworks, I'd say I'd have to give the Republicans credit for adapting quickly to changing from a pandemic ignoring in-person convention to a hybrid model, which I think probably surprised everyone with its polish and professional presentation. I mean, the use of monuments, grand backdrops, the pageantry, was very much in the tradition of Republicans. I think really Reagan's campaign established that kind of imagery and used it a lot in their campaigns. But absolutely the low light is using the White House, using White House staff to speak on your behalf, using the diplomatic reception room to hand out citizenship, to talk about hostages that were released, or to use the East Wing to hand out citizenship certificates. I mean, there was just this reality show element to a lot of the week in which the president likes to give out awards or give out acknowledgments or issue presidential pardons. But it's completely inappropriate in the context of a political convention. And to have Kellyanne Conway and the White House press secretary, Kylie McEnany, speaking on behalf of the president. Now they could say, well, we're speaking as an individual on our personal behalf, but it's still wrong. It's inappropriate. And of course, Mike Pompeo from a foreign country, completely breaking the norms and some certainly ethical and legal questions that are there. And Vice President Pence's speech to me from Fort McHenry, which is the scene of a significant battle between America and Britain in 1812, really was symbolic of the battle that is going on in this election. And the rhetoric overall this week was so harsh and so heated that it really gives you at least a verbal, the idea that there's a verbal civil war going on. But if you look in the streets, it could develop into more than that. So that's a real low light for me.
Yeah, the battle lines are drawn in a way.
Absolutely.
How about you, Jared? What was your high and low from the week?
I have to agree with what was said, but also, as Kim highlighted, the production value that the Republicans had, I was really impressed. They had less time to prepare for this than the Democrats. Democrats knew they were going to go not in person weeks, if not months ahead of the Republicans, and you couldn't tell the difference. If anything, the Republicans had more sort of logistical frustrations than the Republicans did, and that is definitely a highlight for the GOP. Now, in terms of low light, I think it's sort of a bit of a Rorschach test. It depends if you are a supporter or not of President Trump, because we saw this in the debates with Hillary Clinton in 2016, where a lot of people would watch those debates and say, this is ridiculous. Trump is making a spectacle of this. This is not serious. How can anyone support this on the Hillary side? On the Trump side, the Trump supporters were saying, this is fantastic. He is making a mockery of this whole thing. This is not who a typical politician is not what we want. And that is, Trump is living up to what we want. So Trump is doing what his supporters have wanted him to do. And even then, beyond what his supporters have wanted him to do, we talk about how abnormal it is using the White House for a convention, how abnormal it is for his advisors to be so completely flouting Hatch Act regulations. Those sorts of regulations have really not been enforced ever. Trump, in many ways,
I would dispute that. It was drummed into us when we worked at the White House.
Right, but was it enforced?
Level. Well, yes.
As in people...
Well, no, because nobody broke it.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, though, is that it was internally enforced, but it was not actually enforced in terms of anyone suffered because of it.
Yeah.
No one was taken to court because of violations of the Hatch Act. It is something that, again, was a norm, but not really an enforced law. Yeah. And that is what Trump has excelled at pushing, saying, look at all these holes in our system.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to... So many people were dancing along both sides, Democrats and Republicans were dancing. I'm just going to push right through it. If you want to do something about it, then do something about it. But I think it really is a high and a low light. Depends on what perspective you're coming from.
Yeah,
definitely. And taking in mind like how they approached it and the way that they decided we're going to push this and we're going to push it hard. What were some of the different strategies and techniques that we saw the Republicans test over this past week of the convention? Do you think they worked? Were they effective?
You want me to? I'll
anyone.
Sorry.
Anyone go for it.
The thing that I took away, again, the speech made this abundantly clear, how Trump intends to campaign against Biden. That's abundantly clear. And it always was clear, but it got very clearly stated tonight. And that is the prominence of China was really interesting. And just, it seems to be that dial goes to infinity, it would seem. There's no bad politics in that at the moment, and being tough on China and the US. But the way Trump is looking to wedge Biden on that issue, with lines like, China will own this country if Biden is elected, or things that, he quoting some of Biden's earlier statements about the China relationship being good for the United States. So that the prominence of that as a campaign issue, And then number two is the law and order, sense of crisis in the streets and the lawlessness that will result if you elect Joe Biden, that somehow Biden is a tool of the radical left, which is, the radical left would be surprised to hear that about Joe Biden. That was sort of the big critique of him from the left of his own party, how moderate and conservative actually he is relative to them. But the idea that, and you know, the other thing is this sense of crisis that has to be created in order to, how do you campaign as an incumbent president with COVID? Well, you've got to have this other big, you think, you know, it's actually, it's not so bad. But boy, oh boy, there's this other thing out there that's really scary and really terrible. And I stand between, you know, that state of chaos and you, and Trump holding himself out of that. He needs everything and anything that is not COVID and is scary and mobilized, you know. And that's the other thing, Jared, just reflecting on what you said, you know, how you parse it depends on your political viewpoint. I was trying to think, who's this event for? Was it, and who's the speech for? Is this going to swing? You know, the speech I could see being a play to undecideds, not that there are very many left, it would seem, according to the polls, but the whole 4 days, and conventions are this in large measure, about getting your base revved up. But they've also got to start to make, you know, you got to make a message to the center as well, the voters who are up for grabs and decide each election essentially. And I didn't get a strong sense of that, or as strong a sense of that. And that was a little odd too. The one counter to that would be, so I don't know about you other people on the call, but the number of times they tried to say we're not racist, putting African-American speakers up, and you're going, part of me, I know the data on this so well, like the African-American community is essentially a 95-5 Democrat-Republican constituency. I just wonder what, you know, are they, it's not, I don't think it's an appeal to African Americans to try and vote for Republican. I think they're trying to send a signal to white voters that we're not racist, basically.
Yeah. And do you guys think that was effective? Did it work?
Yeah, they have clearly spent the entire week trying to address Trump's weaknesses with women and with African Americans and with his son, having some Hispanics as well. But whether it's going to come through that the few people they could find to represent that part of the vote is going to translate into votes for Trump or cut into Biden's overwhelming lead in those areas, you know, I don't think it'll be effective. I think it was really just, as you say, to allow others to say, okay, well, he isn't a racist, or you know, he's not a misogynist. All these people are talking about him. I mean, we had so many of his family members and other individuals talking about how much empathy and compassion he has. And, well, we wish people could see it. Well, why not? Why doesn't he show us himself? So I'm not sure that's going to fly with the undecideds either. The other campaign strategy, as you say, is fashioning himself as the law and order president. But I don't know how much longer he can get away with saying what's happening in Democrat cities are Democrats' fault. He's the president of the United States. And at the end of the day, this is happening on his watch, not on the watch of Joe Biden, who is not the president of the United States. Right. So, you know, how long, I mean, obviously his supporters are going to keep looking at it through that lens, but he has to, I don't know that he's going to get to the point where he's going to ratchet down the rhetoric, because it's a winning formula for him. He thinks it's a winning formula for him, but I think if this goes on and the protests and civil unrest continue, I'm not sure it's going to work in his favor.
Yeah. And Jared, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so the contradictions that we're talking about here, that's sort of a hallmark of the Trump administration in many ways. He is simultaneously for the forgotten man, as well as being for the corporations. He'll speak to both of them, saying, "Oh, I'm helping you out, and I'm helping you out." So what we're seeing, I think, with the race issues is, I don't think he's really going to get a huge change in women voters or with black voters. What he really wants to do is try to disincentivize those potential Biden voters from voting, saying, "Do you really want to vote for Biden?" Because again, that's what happened in 2016, right? The Democratic voters did not turn out for Hillary. It was a turnout thing. And in 2020, turnout is most likely going to be literally harder than ever. To just get your vote counted is going to be harder than ever. You really want to, so the Trump campaign is asking, you really want to go through all that effort for a guy who is X, Y, and Z, and not actually listening all that well? And I think you have to give the Trump speech some credit as well. He really took the number one thing that we see about Joe Biden, him being a nice guy, him being empathetic, and turned it around and said, "Oh, while Biden is being empathetic and listening to you in Michigan or Wisconsin, he's then coming back to DC and voting for these trade deals that are going to kill your jobs." They really addressed that head on, and he did, as well as the prior speakers. And so I think those sort of contradictions, though, are sort of hallmark to this administration. And you could see that even as far back as, or not that far back, even recently, the State of the Union address. If you actually read that address, it is scattershot all over the place. Yeah. And tonight, the address was as well. He is just doing the Oprah and Carr thing, saying, "You get a car, you get a car." Everyone wins in the Trump administration. There's no one that loses.
He was more disciplined, though, today. And I think pretty much during the week, even though we've seen him every day, don't know that we've heard him too much on Twitter this week. And he's pretty much stuck to his script. He certainly did tonight. Yeah.
He knew how to use the teleprompter to vacillate between.
I mean, it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was a speech that really inspired you. I really don't feel inspired by the whole week, quite frankly, because of the constant drumbeat of excessive negativism and the grievance that comes across from conservatives who have been waiting for somebody like Donald Trump since Ronald Reagan to deliver on these social issues that they feel so strongly about. We've heard so much about religious freedoms and abortion and pro-life issues and school choice and all of these things, more than we heard really on any foreign policy, despite all the talk about China in the speech today. Really, it's been a total focus to me on the issues that are important to the base and law and order.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned a lot of things from throughout the week that maybe you'd never seen before or were quite unusual. What would you say were the biggest surprises that came out of this week of the RNC?
For me, my earlier comment about the number of minority faces, faces of color speakers that were, and again, what is the strategy there? The other surprise was Kim's right. It was really Reagan that started to bring that sense of pageantry and sort of a hint of regalness, if you will, to the presidency and the campaign for the presidency. But I typically associate with Reagan's inauguration, not the convention or the campaign, at least. But this goes to a whole another level. The family figuring so prominently through the week. It's. I mean, we keep saying unconventional, and
it's hard to get away from that term.
Perhaps not technically illegal, although dancing on the edge, I think, with respect to the Hatch Act. But really surprising how prominently the family and official institutions, the White House itself, figuring taking that level of. Yeah, it is a hallmark of Republican administrations, particularly associated, Kim's right, with Reagan, but taking that up, 10x to where we've seen it in anything in the past.
Yeah, I would say too, the surprise to me were the number of women, especially elected women, really giving scaremongering speeches, like Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, who helped Trump give his speech in front of Mount Rushmore. But she was so cool and calm, but so pointed in her criticism, but also saying we have the right to arm ourselves as a counter to a standing army. I mean, you just don't hear stuff like that coming out of women. Elise Stefanik, the congresswoman from New York, again, just denying the impeachment and trying to, Pam Bondi did that too, the former Florida attorney general, turning making Biden sound like he was the corrupt one. But there was a lot of aggression and almost militaristic talk from a lot of the women that I found a bit surprising and disappointing, I have to say.
Yeah, and were there any rising stars, like if we're casting our mind to 2024, who do we think the Republicans are going to be watching in the years to come?
Nikki
That's
Haley.
what I found interesting, because usually this is the platform for those rising stars, right? We all remember Obama giving a speech at the DNC in 2004, and then him having, 2 years until he ran for Senate for Illinois, became my senator. And who is the rising star in this one? There is no rising star because the star is Trump, right? Maybe you could say the woman from the congresswoman from New York is a rising star, but it's what's shocking and maybe not surprising, but still shocking, is just the light between the GOP and Trump is just this. There is no light anymore, right? And so usually the GOP would insist on having a rising star, like in 2012, you could see maybe a Rubio, something like that. But no, this is not what you're seeing now. You're seeing anyone who is on the Trump agenda. And you're not seeing any continuity from 2016 in terms of who is a rising star then, who do we want to tout, who's going to be the next generation. It's purely the Trump show.
I thought Nikki Haley, thought it was a pretty good speech, all things considered. And clearly she's not done with politics, not by a long shot. And if you're looking for that generational leap, and you're sort of saying, and not the second generation of Trump children, by the way, then I thought she was sort of in that set of perhaps future leaders who had a good convention. But I think we haven't talked about one of the more surprising is no platform.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah.
Isn't that it's
I meant to say
remarkable?
That. And remarkable.
4 more years, thanks. Yeah. That's the agenda. And
is that what they'll say in 2024? 4 more years.
Well, 4 more years of it won't be. I don't think the Constitution is going to get amended between now and then. But is it another someone in the Trump tradition? And perhaps their last name might be Trump, or Pence would be the most obvious.
I was gonna say, Ivanka Trump. You have to wonder which of the children between Eric, Don Jr., and Ivanka are going for the mantle, for either as the top Trump child or as a potential political candidate, because I think they were all sort of doing their bit. Certainly Don Jr. was. The only other one I would mention is Senator Tim Scott, the African-American senator from South Carolina, who I'm sure, everyone's talking about potential, future candidate possibly. Mm-hmm. Let's just hope it's not Kimberly Guilfoyle, though, because I don't think I could listen to her speeches too many times.
Well, it felt like the volume knob was turned all the way up on this convention compared to the last one. It was a lot louder.
The Nikki Haley speech was really interesting from my perspective because she spoke specifically about a very violent racist incident and how they healed from it. And that sort of goes
didn't
against...
mention the flag.
Right, yeah, didn't explicitly mention there's a Confederate flag. That was a divisive image, but that's besides the point.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the fact that she was able to be on the Trump National Convention, essentially, and say, oh, yeah, we've done healing in my home state. She was the most to go out of the sort of Trump lane in many ways.
That's a good point.
Yep.
So what lessons might we see for Australia following on? We've had 2 weeks back-to-back of conventions in America. What can Australia take from this?
I come back to on this. Well, I think the obvious message is one, our research time and time again, finds just the degree of partisan polarization in the US. It's this is going to be a very negative campaign. It has to be if you're Trump, you're behind in the polls. You have to paint a very bleak portrait of what the other side would do if they win. And so it's just going to entrench that negativity and polarization, partisan animus, if you will. It's not just you're bullish for your own team. It's partisanship in the United States is now becoming increasingly associated with dislike or hostility towards your political opponents, and not just among members of Congress, but increasingly among lay people as well. And so this campaign is going to double down on that and cement that as a feature of American politics for a while at least. But beyond that observation, that observation does have implications of policy making. It means really effectively there's gridlock in Congress. There's very little Congress can agree on with divided government. And you really need control. You've got to sweep all three institutions to really move the policy needle, other than through things like executive orders and things like that a president can do unilaterally. So there's that. But what I was going to say is foreign policy. Again, just that the heat on China and the US-China relationship. I think everybody in the world understands that is just a political rag doll at the moment in the United States. I think the thing we will be watching as a center, and I'm sure Canberra's focused on as well, is what's talk and what's real, what stunts might get enacted between now and the election, or even in the lame duck session, say if Trump were to lose, or if Trump were to win. Where does this go? How much if Trump were to win, what survives the campaign rhetoric and becomes policy, and where does that put Australia? With America, our closest ally by far, and thinking, and doing some things, quite important things here of our own volition with respect to China and our relationship with China. So just keeping a very close eye on that from an Australian policy perspective.
Yep.
Yeah. Anything else you'd want to touch on, anyone, before we wrap it up for today?
No, I was just going to say the same as Simon, that the next couple of months are going to be a really critical moment. The president's going to feel emboldened after, I think, the high of this week of the convention, seeing himself portrayed as he wants to be portrayed. They had total control of that message. It's the first time he's probably been able to do that. Now he's got to get back to governing. And yeah, he's got to get back to governing and dealing with the crises that are affecting America, with the pandemic, the shattered economy, climate change issues, racial injustice, and the protests. And so it's not going to go his way like it has this week for him. And really it launches the official start of the general election campaign season. So I think it's really going to get heated up. And then we have the whole question over the vote itself, the election day itself, and access to free and fair elections. And that should be a whole nother conversation one day about how that's going to transpire and what's going to transpire in terms of the result, and when will we get the result.
Yeah,
I'll just
absolutely.
quickly add on top of the prior comments, in terms of, we just watched 2 weeks of political conventions. And what I'm interested in is where are the few, but still there, similarities between the two. And as Simon said, China, that's going to feature prominently, and I think that's going to feature prominently regardless of who wins. But two other things that I think are going to feature prominently is one, that focus on the middleman, on the forgotten man, the middle America. That's in the Biden campaign rhetoric extensively. That's clearly been in Trump's rhetoric as well. And then last thing that I think is particularly interesting from my perspective is technology. No one really likes the tech platforms anymore. They don't have many friends left in DC. And I think there is a growing bipartisan consensus on needing to do something on tech, but just it's not as developed in terms of the thinking about what to be done about it as it is on China. Those are the two areas of bipartisanship in terms of policy really are China and tech. But the tact for what to do about them between the two parties are somewhat different at this point.
Definitely. Well, the U.S. Study Center is going to be with everyone for the next couple months as we tick down to the election on the 3rd of November. You'll hear from us throughout the debates and throughout the rest of the campaign trail. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope to see you again soon.